Hi, this is Craig Wesco recording for s2p.org, and today we're going to talk about, did God give us permission to eat animals? So a lot of people, they cite Noah getting off the ark and God saying to him, just as I've given you the green herb of the ground, now I give you everything. The animals are given into your hand. And people interpret that as God saying, I changed my mind. In the beginning, I just wanted you to eat vegan, but now animals are on the menu. So I wanted to do a closer look and see whether that's actually what was happening. So if we look at James 4:17 and Deuteronomy 3:15 or 30:15, we see that God gives us these choices, this freedom, where he says, here's the path of life, what is good, and here's the path that is not good that leads to death. And he gives us that choice to choose which one. And that's how I interpret what's going on there, because there's a few other context clues that indicate that God was not pleased by the arrangement, that God wasn't saying, I changed my mind. So for instance, in Genesis 8, verse 20 and 21, he calls us evil imaginations. He says we are motivated by the evil inclinations of our heart. And he's responding to Noah building an altar and burning animals on it, which is not what God instructed him to do. That was something Noah did on his own. And so when we think of this in contrast to the very good instructions God gave us in the beginning, Genesis chapter 1, it concludes by saying God saw everything and it was very good. And this is after God said, have dominion over the animals, feed them, eat fruit and vegetation as your food. And so this is very different from the kind of description God gave after the flood here, when Noah built the altar and started burning animals. Instead, he says, the fear of you will be on the animals, and you will see them as food, and the world will be filled with violence, and you're following your own evil imaginations. And so this is a very stark contrast to the initial creation, when he says everything's very good and everything's peaceful, that kind of thing. And when we think of fear, the introduction of fear was when Adam and Eve first sinned. And it said they were afraid and they hid themselves among the trees and they hid themselves by clothing themselves. And so this fear was not there in the beginning. It says they were naked and unashamed. Nobody was afraid. But now this fear is linked with animals and our violence to the animals. So in Genesis 9, verse 2, God says the animals will be afraid of you and you're seeing them as food. And the same sentiment is echoed in Habakkuk 2:17, where it says, because of your violence toward the animals, they're afraid of you. They're terrified of you. So fear was never part of God's plan, and it's the opposite of God's way of love and peace. And so if we're using this idea of fear, if we think about it as connected with the fallen world, the ways of following our own inclinations instead of God's will, then a lot of things make sense. So we think of Galatians 5:22 and 23, where it says the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. So these things are the opposite of fear and violence. So it says perfect love casts out fear. So there's no fear in love. God's way is love. There's no fear in love. So fear is of the fall, and as we mentioned, Adam and Eve, as soon as they sinned, that's the first thing that happened. They were overcome with fear. And so with the animals, their fear is connected to our violence toward them, which was not part of God's plan from the beginning. And so when we say, did we have permission? Well, we don't have permission. God gave us the freedom to kill animals, but then there's consequences. Consequences, animal fear. Consequence of the fallen world remaining fallen. But then if we look at 1 Corinthians 10:23, it says if we know to do good and we don't do it, actually I believe that's James 4:17, but 1 Corinthians 10:23 also works, where if we know what we're doing, if we know what is good, God tells us what's very good in the beginning, Genesis 1:29, to eat only the fruit of the tree and the green plants, and if we don't do that, then for us it's sin. And so we shouldn't be looking for ways to be motivated to justify acting contrary to that will of God. And instead, we should repent and trust God's will, that he knows what is best for us and the way we should live. So this is Craig Wesco recording for s2p.org.